had full confidence in Clark and readily agreed. The next day, I ran into Clark surrounded by a crowd at the entrance of the bar. They seemed to be talking about me. "Clark, when are you planning to break up with that old beta?" Clark paused for a few seconds, and just as I thought he wouldn't respond, he spoke up without hesitation. "Almost done. As soon as he breaks off his engagement with Martin and William takes over, we'll split." The William he mentioned is my father's illegitimate son from outside the family. Lately, he's been openly contesting me for the inheritance. I never thought I'd lose, let alone lose so quickly. I let out a soft grunt and turned back toward the bar. It wasn't that I wanted to run away. Just didn't want to cause a scene in public or end up looking bad. The Omega who had approached me earlier noticed I'd come back and quietly took a seat beside me, holding a drink. "What's wrong? Didn't you say your family member was strict?" I gave a wry smile and clinked my glass against his. "I just didn't want to disappoint someone special, so I ended things earlier. He's not the one in charge at home anymore." The Omega let out a light laugh. "So does that mean what you said before still stands?" The moment the words left his mouth, a sharp stare shot down my back like ice. I turned around and met a pair of dark, cold eyes. Derek. Clark had been there for who knows how long, his gaze fixed on the Omega in my arms. "Who is he?" The Omega shivered slightly under his stare, instinctively pressing closer into my arms. I glanced at him briefly. "Mind your own business." Clark's expression stayed grim as he asked again, "Who is he? You never truly gave your heart. What exactly are you trying to prove by acting like this?" I didn't feel like arguing, so I simply carried the person past him. "It's not your place to question me." My arm was gently pulled back. "You promised me you'd only have one person." I let a sardonic smile tug at my lips. "You can't actually believe I meant what I said, can you? You really thought that was real? It was just for fun. Like playing with kids." "That's right, just like that," slowly picking up the pieces of my broken self-worth. Clark froze, his face gradually growing pale. "You're kidding. You were just pretending from the start, weren't you?" I stopped a taxi on the roadside for the Omega. "I'm sorry, what happened earlier was my fault. Let's just call it a day." The Omega let out a soft sigh of disappointment. "All right then, we'll reschedule for next time. See you later." Watching the taxi drive away, suddenly a strong force surged from behind. My waist was tightly gripped by large hands, and Clark pressed against my back. His voice muffled. "I knew you wouldn't treat me like that, and you just couldn't bring yourself to hurt me." I gave a brief scoff and pushed him off. "Don't flatter yourself so much." Clark adopted his usual playful tone. "I don't care. You're clearly the one who notices me." I felt worn out trying to keep up with this whole charade. I pulled out a cigarette and lit it. A small spark flickered faintly in the dark, came out suddenly, with no warning at all. "Clark, let's end this." He seemed not to understand. "What are you talking about? What exactly are we breaking?" I gave a soft sigh and repeated. I said, "Clark, let's end this." Clark studied my expression closely, searching for any sign I was lying. After a long moment, he found nothing, his voice slightly strained. "Why? Did I do something wrong? I'll change. I can change anything. Please don't leave me." By the end, it was nothing but pleading. Back then, I would have easily softened at the sight of him like this. But that's the past. This is now. The thought of him deliberately getting close to me just for William made me feel deeply unsettled. I spoke quietly. "I'm tired of the same thing. I want something new, and you can't give that to me. With so many options, why stay with just one person?" Since he brought up ending things that day, Clark has shown up at my doorstep every single day without fail. Through wind and rain, his presence never wavers. The storm tonight is heavier and longer than usual, yet Clark remains exactly where he is, standing in the downpour without moving. I grew restless watching him, so I pulled the curtains shut and turned off the lights early to go to bed. The next morning, I saw him lying in a puddle, burning with fever and barely conscious. I was worried something serious might happen, so I took him to the hospital. On the way to the hospital, Clark came to several times. He clutched my hand tightly, his eyes red from fever, weak and swaying unsteadily. "Please don't leave me. I can't imagine how I'd get through life without you. Don't go, please. Don't leave me behind." Once a person lets their guard down and shows real feeling, it's hard to take it back. Seeing Clark like that, it was impossible not to feel touched. I didn't answer, but I wasn't as firm as I had been before. Clark sensed my softened attitude and finally relaxed enough to close his eyes. After the 4-drip was set up, the doctor asked me to go buy some porridge for Clark. What could I do? Of course, I followed the doctor's instruction, returning with the takeout porridge. I noticed a new person had arrived in the room. William must have been there for some time. He sat facing away from the door, peeling an apple beside Clark's bed. Clark, you really didn't need to go through all this trouble just for me. We still have other options, don't we? Clark looked out the window, his voice weak. James is getting worse by the day. To get your name on the will, Martin's support is essential. William let out a small sob. But if I can get the Song family's backing, it would be just as good. Why not simply marry me? It's really a simple matter. Why are you making it so complicated? Think carefully. Do you truly want to help me gain the inheritance? Or do you just want Derek and Martin to break off their engagement so you can have him all to yourself? William's voice cracked with emotion as he began to cry. You've already fallen for him, haven't you? All that talk about helping me was just an excuse. Tears streamed down the Omega's face, their sorrow deeply touching. Clark calmly wiped the tears from his eyes. His voice was steady and soft, yet each word sank deep into my heart. I've only just returned to the Song family, and things are still uncertain. I'm barely holding myself together. I can't help you. Don't overthink it. I'll never be interested in someone like Derek. He's careless with relationships, and I find him deeply unpleasant. William's crying slowed, his eyes glistening as he asked, Really? Clark paused for a moment, then gave a quiet nod. My fingers tightened around the plastic bag handle. For a fleeting second, I wanted to rush in and pour the hot soup straight over their heads. But I held back. It would have been too shameful, too unbecoming. But in the end, I held back, too embarrassing, too far from who I am. William's been looking for a way to get me, and this kind of move would only hurt him in the end. But I couldn't just walk away quietly. I pulled out my phone, found Clark's number, and dialed. The phone rang a few seconds. When Clark saw the name on the screen, his expression eased slightly. His voice was soft, yet just warm enough to matter. I heard from the doctor that you went to get soup for me. I didn't say anything, and he called out softly, Mr. Derek? I took a deep breath and said into the phone, Look at the door. Clark looked over. Confused, his smile froze on his face, and his complexion turned pale in an instant. I stared back at him through the small window, word by word, my voice coming clearly from the receiver. Clark, you don't have a chance anymore. Leaving the hospital, I drove to the boxing gym. Whenever I had emotions I couldn't process, I'd let them out on the heavy bag, one punch after another, sweat pouring down. I kept going from afternoon until night, my shirt soaked through, yet I still didn't feel satisfied. A footstep approached. I was fired up and swung a left hook at the person coming near. Martin caught the punch effortlessly and raised an eyebrow. Good power, but your breathing's off. What are you doing here? I'm back from a business trip to see my fiancé. I tossed him a pair of gloves. Want to spar? Martin had just put them on when my fist was already aimed straight at his center. He reacted quickly, raising both hands to block his head. I didn't slow down. I stepped up my pace, pushing him back with each strike. You did this on purpose, didn't you? You knew about Clark and William being close all along, right? You never make a deal that loses you anything, so you set up this bet to begin with, using your all-knowing view. Do you find it amusing watching me play the fool? Martin didn't fight back. He just kept taking the blows. I knew the two of them had a close connection, but I only found out about it a day earlier than you. Everyone has their own selfishness. My selfish desire is for you, and I don't see anything wrong with that. So, he clamped both of my hands together firmly, pulled me forward, and I stumbled into his arms. You've lost the bet. We'll be married next month. What do you think? My fiancé. I pushed him away, feeling a bit annoyed. Why me specifically? There are plenty of Omegas who want to marry you. Why pick someone like me? A beta? Martin looked at me, narrowing his eyes slightly. Derek, are you really unaware? Or just pretending? I'll say it again. Clearly, I waved my hand to cut him off and turned toward the steps leading down from the platform. All just nonsense. I don't want to hear it. Martin called out to me from behind. You were the one who said you'd marry me when we grew up, weren't you? You made a promise to me first. Why are you breaking it now? Just thinking about that gives me a headache. You were so delicate and fair as a kid. I thought you'd grow up to be a graceful omega. I never expected you'd become an enigma. I could have handled you turning into an alpha, but of all things, you ended up as an enigma. Someone who can carry a beta's child. I've had deep emotional struggles with the idea of pregnancy since I was young. 2 days after the announcement of my upcoming wedding to Martin, an unfamiliar phone call came in. I answered, and it was Clark's voice on the other end. Brother Derek, I'm going through a sensitive time right now. What does it have to do with me? He let out a faint smile. Back then, during my sensitive periods, you were always there with me. I felt a bit impatient. What are you trying to say? My voice was a little hoarse. Could you come see me? No, I said, then went to hang up the phone. Then I won't bother you anymore. I'll just quietly disappear. My heart gave a sudden jolt. I paused for a few seconds, but in the end, I still hung up. The next day, William showed up without warning. He got straight to the point. Clark is in danger. That's still my answer. What's it got to do with me? William seemed at his breaking point, gripping my collar with red eyes. How can you be so cold? He hasn't been conscious for days. He's been calling out your name over and over. Yes, he did something wrong to you, but he regrets it now. You're the one who's won. He loves you deeply, he truly feels for you, and he can't live without you. My heart was pounding fast. I didn't know what expression to make. Clark felt like a thorn in my heart. Every time he's mentioned, he gives me a sharp pang inside. Seeing that I stayed silent for so long, William let go of me and stepped back a few paces. I've delivered my message. Whether you come or not is up to you. He turned and walked away. I stood at the door for a long time, my thoughts still unsettled. Half an hour later, I grabbed my coat and rushed out the door. I still couldn't let it go. I just couldn't ignore it. I hurried straight to Clark's place, hesitated for a moment before entering my fingerprint, and the door opened. The living room was empty, so I headed toward the bedroom. Just as I reached for the doorknob, voices came from inside. Clark seemed to be on the phone. The voice on the other end sounded a bit like William. Will he really come? Clark's voice was worn out. He'll come. He has to come, no matter what. He won't ignore me if it means saving my life. William sounded worried. Now that the wedding date is being talked about, James has already asked his lawyer to update his will. I'm still nervous. Clark's voice was weak, yet it carried a calming certainty. Don't worry, as long as he shows up today, I'm confident we can make things right. He couldn't possibly leave me behind. He just wouldn't. It was hard to tell whether he was trying to reassure himself or William. I'd been fooled again. After all I'd been through, that silly hope still lingered in my heart. And then I got hurt once more. How could someone be so low? I took a deep breath and pushed the door open, stepping in completely unguarded. Clark caught sight of me out of the corner of his eye. He froze instantly, as if his body had locked up. His neck moved stiffly, inch by inch, and all color drained from his face. His limbs seemed to have lost control, scrambling frantically off the bed. William hadn't noticed anything yet. He sounded muffled from inside the blanket. Clark, what's going on over there? What happened? I stood still as Clark scrambled toward me using all 4 limbs. Let me explain. Please listen to me. This was the 3rd time Clark had misled me. No one gets away with that kind of trick twice, let alone 3 times. I pushed him hard. He wasn't ready and stumbled forward, hitting his head on the bedpost. He collapsed to the floor. My pupils widened sharply, and before I even realized it, I was already rushing toward him. Clark's lips curled weakly into a faint smile, his voice barely audible. I knew you still cared about me. Then he slumped forward, losing consciousness. At first light, William arrived. He rushed forward with red eyes and raised his hand as if to strike me. What did you do to him? Why is he hurt? I reached out and caught his hand, too weary to fight back, my voice cold. I won't go easy on you. Are you really sure you want to do this? William's hand trembled slightly, and he lowered his eyes without meeting mine. I shut the ward door behind me and went to the smoking area. as the cigarette burned in my mouth. I couldn't help thinking of Clark's words. He had his reasons. An hour passed. 7 or 8 cigarette butts lay scattered at my feet. When I reached into the pack again, it was empty. It was time to go back. Standing outside the ward door, I felt a mix of emotions. That's where I'd been misled last time. Just as I was about to push the door open, a corner of my vision caught something through the gap. Clark had somehow woken up and was now sitting upright in bed. William was carefully feeding him the soup he had brought. "Clark, you acted too recklessly this time." Clark drank mechanically, his eyes empty and distant, muttering to himself, "There's no time left. Their wedding date is getting closer every day. Once Derek and Martin are married, it'll be impossible. They can't get married. It just can't happen." William covered his face, a soft sob escaping. "Clark, aren't you being foolish? You don't have to go this far for me." Clark paused for a few seconds, as if just coming back to himself, his lips moving silently. Just then, an older man walked by in the hallway, talking on the phone. What he said was too faint for me to make out. In the next moment, William suddenly stood up and wrapped his arms around Clark. Clark didn't pull away. Instead, he gently reached out to stroke the back of his head, his hands, hanging at his sides, clenched slightly. I felt once again how foolish my own assumptions had been. Leaving the hospital, I wandered home in a daze, locked myself in my room and didn't answer when anyone knocked. Lying on the bed, I drifted into a deep sleep. In my dream, I seemed to stand once again at the threshold where everything began to turn dark. Mother fell down the stairs. Father glanced down from the staircase and froze for a moment in shock. He was about to go down to check on her, but stopped abruptly when his younger sister said she was afraid, then turned to protect her instead and went back into the room. Mother stared at Father's retreating figure, her eyes filled with despair. I've never forgotten that look. It hit me only much later, in the year I was 8. My father had been involved in a serious emotional affair with his younger sister, the one who claimed she'd come to care for Mother. My mind went completely blank. When I came to myself, I was already on my knees beside Mother, my hands trembling and unsure where to rest. "Mother, hold on, help is coming soon. It'll be okay. Everything will be all right." She was in severe pain, her sweat soaking through her clothes, yet she still managed to give me a comforting smile. Shaking slightly, she raised her hand and gently wiped my tears with the clean back of her palm. "My dear Derek, don't cry, don't cry. Mommy is going far away now, but you'll have to take care of yourself from now on. Promise me you will?" Everything before me blurred. A tight lump in my throat left me unable to speak a single word. "Goodbye, Derek." The moment the words left her lips, her arm fell heavily down, like a stone dropped into still water, shattering my heart with silence. I ran at Father in a frantic rage, demanding answers. The aunt turned pale with fear and quickly hid behind her husband. My father spoke coldly. "It's her own fault. She would have been fine if she just stayed put. She chose to go upstairs herself, so it's only natural she ended up like this." The perpetrator blamed the victim as if it were completely justified. But at that moment, I couldn't do anything to stop it. My heart ached sharply, and suddenly, a familiar voice broke through the haze in my mind. I snapped my eyes open. Martin's face was just inches away. He reached out and gently wiped the tear from my cheek, his brow furrowed. "Another nightmare?" I stared blankly for a full 30 seconds before letting out a slow breath. "How did you even get in here?" "Climbed through the window." I froze. "Are you insane? It's the 5th floor." "I know," he said, taking the cigarette butt from my hand. "I tried calling you, but you didn't answer, so I had to climb through the window. Come down for dinner later." I closed my eyes. "I don't feel like moving. I'm not hungry." Seeing that I wasn't going to get up, he simply picked me up around the waist and carried me downstairs. The dining table was already set with food. He pulled out a chair across from him, scooped some soup into a bowl, and placed it beside me. "Try this. I made it. I think you'll like it." I took a small sip, then froze. The taste was so familiar, like the chicken soup my mother used to make when I was sick as a child. How is this possible? How could it be this similar? Martin spoke casually, brushing it off. "When I was a kid, I used to watch Camila prepare chicken soup for you from behind. I picked up a few basics over time, but never quite got the flavor right. Until one day I met an old nanny from the Shin family. That's when I realized my choice of chicken had been wrong all along. He lowered his eyes, lost in thought. I meant to make it for you sooner, but back then you were spending a lot of time with Clark. I never got the chance. A mix of emotions stirred inside me. My mother once told me that making the soup involved a complex process, and I only got to enjoy it when I was sick. After a few chaotic days, Martin suggested we go out for some fresh air. I really should do something else to take my mind off things, so I didn't say no. There was a fireworks show in the neighboring city, and by the time we arrived, the streets were already glowing with lights. Next to the venue, a whole street of stalls had been set up, offering food, games, and all sorts of things you could need. People would come here to pass the time while waiting. The crowd was thick, and my hand hanging by my side was gently taken hold of. Martin's quiet voice cut through the noisy atmosphere with clear intensity. "It's too crowded. Be careful not to get separated." We walked hand in hand for a while, but ended up feeling tired and found a quiet spot to rest. Martin went to get some water, and I sat on the bench, rubbing my legs. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw two figures approaching along the path through the cherry blossom grove. After taking a closer look, I realized both people were someone I knew. William was walking ahead, holding a string of candied haws. Clark followed closely behind like a dependable helper, carrying an outer garment. From its style, it looked to be William's. William suddenly stopped and smoothly passed the remaining haws to the person behind him. "Clark, I can't eat anymore." Clark instinctively brought it toward his mouth, then paused mid-motion, quickly switching to wrapping it in a plastic bag instead. William blinked. "Why aren't you eating, Clark? You used to finish whatever I didn't want. It's too sweet." "I don't like it, all right?" he said, tugging lightly on Clark's sleeve with a playful pout. "Clark, I can't walk anymore." Without hesitation, Clark knelt in front of William. As he lifted him onto his back and looked up, their eyes met directly. He froze mid-motion, as if he'd stopped breathing, lips parting slightly as though about to speak. Just then, Martin returned from buying water. I pulled my gaze away and grabbed Martin's collar, pulling him down slightly so I could tilt my head up and kiss him. He froze for a few seconds, then seemed to react and reach forward, only for me to pull away first. Looking back, the path we just walked on was completely empty. Martin followed my gaze, and with his sharp mind, he probably figured it out right away. "Sorry." I rubbed my temples tiredly. I'd acted too impulsively just now. He raised an eyebrow. "Why apologize?" I blinked slightly. "You're not upset I used you? Why would I be?" He handed me the cold drink and sat down on the other side. "I got a kiss too, didn't I? If anything, I'm the one who came out ahead. Besides," he looked at me, his eyes softened by the light, "I did it willingly." James passed away the day after returning from City A. His lawyer found me and handed over a document for inheritance transfer. Along with it was a letter written by James in his own hand. In the letter, he said he was sorry to me and my mother. He asked me to let William go, explaining that after he was gone, William would be the only relative I had left in this world, and urged me not to do anything I'd regret later. I couldn't help but laugh coldly at what I read. He knew William wouldn't be able to keep the Shin family's assets, and he also knew the board would never agree to handing over the company to him. So he chose me as the heir instead. He was afraid I might harm William, so he tried to appeal to my emotions. My dear father was still making plans for his illegitimate son right up until the end. The letter in my hands was snatched away, and Martin's frown grew deeper as he read. "James isn't being honest even in death," he said, folding the letter and tearing it into pieces before pulling me close. "It's all nonsense. Don't pay any attention to it. You still have me, and as long as you don't send me away, I'll always be here." On the day of James's funeral, William showed up, with Clark by his side. Seeing them together at the funeral was surprising. I had imagined they'd already fled in panic and gone abroad by now. Before the funeral began, I went to the restroom. Shortly afterward, Clark followed me in. He wrapped his arms around me from behind, pressing his face against my back. his voice muffled. I really missed you. I let out a soft scoff and pulled away from him. But before I could speak, he spoke first. That day at the cherry blossom grove, I can explain, what you saw wasn't what it seemed. I already talked things through with William at the hospital. I like you, and I just can't stay away. He held me for a while and cried, but he didn't push further. He only asked me to watch a fireworks show with him, and then it would be over between us. That familiar irritation returned. I leaned against the sink, reached into my pocket for a cigarette, lit it, and took a slow drag. My voice stayed flat. I don't believe a single word you say. The faint glimmer in his eyes faded slowly, and after a long silence, his voice came out strained. My heart really hurts. You brought this on yourself. I wasn't in the mood to argue with him, so I turned and walked away. After walking a few steps, he called out to me from behind. You can't let go of me, can you? I overheard your conversation with Martin that day. You said you were using him and didn't like him, right? I didn't respond, keeping my pace steady. As I stepped out of the restroom, I ran into Martin at the corner. His expression was deeply mixed, and suddenly he blurted out something unexpected. The wedding is next week. I took the cigarette from my mouth. Sorry, but with James gone, I'm afraid I won't be able to go through with the wedding. He seemed dazed for a moment, forcing a faint smile. It's all right, really? I can wait for you. He was smart enough to realize that my decision has nothing to do with James. James is the one person I care least about in this world. He's gone, and it doesn't affect me at all, but he didn't expose the truth or push me. Instead, he gave a strained smile and said he could wait. I feel guilty for his kindness. I just can't seem to overcome this inner barrier. I didn't let William off the hook. There's a saying, children should settle their parents' debts. Besides, he teamed up with Clark to mislead me. There was no reason not to hold him accountable, but I didn't go too far. I left them a way out. William left for another country, and Clark disappeared without a trace. But with the Song family looking out for him, he's likely doing well enough. On the day of the originally scheduled wedding, Martin's assistant called me. The voice on the other end was frantic, as if the world were coming to an end. Derek, you have to talk to Martin right away. He's been acting strangely and says he wants to go through with the procedure. I frowned. Give me the phone. I can't. It's too late. He's already on his way to the hospital, and no one else can reach him now. We're counting on you, Derek. Got it. Hanging up, I rushed to the hospital in a hurry. I hurried over to the front desk. Hello, is there someone here scheduled for a gland transplant surgery? The nurse checked the computer. Yes, there is an appointment today. Where is it? How do I get there? The nurse instinctively replied, go straight ahead and turn right. There's an elevator. Take it up to the 5th floor. I practically ran there. At the elevator, kept showing as stopped on the 6th floor. I couldn't wait any longer and turned around to take the stairs. Hastily climbing up to the 5th floor, I saw Martin being wheeled into the operating room. Wait, my voice echoed loudly down the quiet hospital hallway. The medical staff turned toward me. He's not doing it. He won't go through with the surgery. I walked over and gently pulled Martin up from the bed. Are you crazy? Why suddenly decide on this surgery? Do you even know how risky it is? 90% chance of serious complications. How many people have died during operations like this? He pushed me away, saying, don't worry about me. You should go now. Don't waste more time. A deep sense of helplessness washed over me. What are you trying to do? Anyway, he stared at me for a long moment, seeing I wasn't leaving, and finally spoke as if giving in. I know that ever since the incident with Camila, you've been carrying emotional weight, which is why you've avoided contact with me ever since I became Enigma, so it's fine. I'll just become Beta instead. That way, I won't cause you any more discomfort. I was stunned, and so were the medical staff. When I finally processed it, I almost laughed in disbelief. Is that really why you treat your body like this? This isn't something to take lightly. Alright, it's serious, but think about it from another angle. If you were to suffer a critical incident during surgery, how could you ever be with me? How could we possibly get married? He looked up, clearly surprised. Are you saying you'd accept me now? My eyes stung a little. I took a deep breath and told him, yes, I will. When my assistant called me that day, I nearly lost my composure. On the way here, I kept thinking. And suddenly realized that it was actually when you went out of your way to make soup for me that I first started feeling something. Martin was eager to marry and held the ceremony the very next day. Since most of the preparations had already been taken care of beforehand, it didn't feel rushed at all. On the way to the wedding, William attacked me. At the moment of life and death, Clark suddenly appeared from nowhere and saved me. He himself suffered serious injuries. William, the one responsible, stood frozen in shock, trembling all over as he whispered, "How? How could this happen?" It seemed he had completely broken down, sitting on the ground and repeating those words over and over. Before I could fully recover from the earlier chaos, Clark had already crawled to my feet. "Can you hug me, please?" Seeing no response from me, his eyes welled up with tears. "You know, from the very first time I saw you, I fell for you. But I was too afraid to admit it. I kept telling myself over and over that everything I did was for William, just to help him. But somewhere along the way, I couldn't tell anymore whether I was really helping him or hoping you'd break up with Martin so we could be together." Sirens rang out. The ones from Martin's people were arriving. Clark gave a faint smile. "Go on. Your loved one is waiting over there." The wedding continued smoothly, as if the intense incident moments ago had never happened. Getting married is exhausting. I collapsed onto the large bed, completely worn out. Martin lay beside the bed, as though he had something important to say. I gave him a light smile. "Go ahead and say it." He turned to face me, saying, "Clark was hospitalized and has now stabilized." I gave a quiet nod. He moved closer, resting his face against my shoulder. "Are you regretting marrying me? Am I being too selfish?" I gently lifted his face and gave him a comforting kiss. "I don't regret it. If I did, I wouldn't have come to the wedding with you. Let bygones be bygones. We can't keep living in the past. What's lost is lost. What matters now is focusing on our present and building a good life together." He froze for a moment, saying, "But," I covered his lips. "I love you, Martin. Don't keep feeling so low. Clark is in the past now. Let's just focus on building our own life together." Do I love Martin? Yes, I do, but more than that, I don't want to let down such a sincere heart. In time, everything from the past will slowly fade away. My future is still long ahead. Don't let it go to waste. Cherish the person right here with you.